Sorry about that.
Yes, that's quite all right. So how big could this get?
So this attack is the biggest we've seen in terms of an attack since 50 years ago on the exact date with the Yom Kippur War. Israel has actually declared war, the first time they've done that in 50 years, against Hamas. In terms of population-wise, per capita, this is a bigger attack than what happened on the U.S. on 9/11. That's why a lot of people are referring to this as Israel's 9/11. Even though Israel knew about the potential of missile attacks out of the Gaza Strip, what has made this attack so different is the fact that Hamas has actually attacked outside of the fence. They were able to breach the fence, get over the fence, and launch these terrorist attacks against peaceful demonstrations, a concert. They've taken hostages. This is a scope and scale we have not seen. We didn't see this during the Intifada. We didn't see this during the uprisings. This is a new level and really has some implications, not just for the region, but globally, and particularly when we start talking about global shipping.
So let's look at that for just a second. We've got a couple of maps we can show. I want to go to the narrow one first, just kind of show the very basic area of what we're talking about here. Obviously, Gaza Strip is the area of most concern, as there you see at the bottom left-hand portion of the screen here. So, Sal, take us through kind of what's affected. And I know you've done a video on the fact that there are two ports in Israel that could be affected by this, but they're up the coast from Gaza.
Yeah, you actually have actually three. You have that port of Ashkelon right there, which is the closest to Gaza. That is a tank terminal. That's been closed by Israel as of right now. It is too close to the proximity of the Gaza Strip. Ashdod, which is the second largest port in Israel, handles medium-sized to small-sized vessels. That is operational, but very restricted at this moment because of port security. And then the main port of Haifa, up and around the area around Tel Aviv, is open, and that is able to handle traffic at this time. But we know, for example, cruise lines have canceled their sailings into the area. We're seeing diversions of some ships that don't want to go into the area. And the fear here is that this conflict grows, that it goes beyond the Gaza Strip and Hamas in the southern part of Israel, but involves Hezbollah in the northern part of Israel coming out of southern Lebanon. We know that Hezbollah has anti-ship missiles. They used these against the Israelis a few years ago. And the fear here is that we see attacks start taking place against offshore oil platforms that are close to Israel, these oil terminals, and potential shipping coming in. So we can see a situation kind of akin to what we're seeing in the Black Sea right now off the coast of Israel.
So let's go to the wider map here, and I just want to get your take on how things could possibly be affected. Obviously, you've got Gaza that goes down, touches Egypt. Not too far past that, you've got the Suez Canal there as well. I remember you mentioning during the Ukraine-Russia conflict, obviously, if Ukraine were to hit a Russian oil tanker, who knows what could happen at that particular point. Israel has accused Iran of backing Hamas, and if Israel were to, say, hit an Iranian tanker in the Mediterranean, that could obviously escalate things very, very quickly there as well.
Yeah, and this is the danger scenario here. If Israel decides Iran has not just providing arms, but a key role in aiding Hamas, then if Israel decides to target Iran, there's obviously targets they can hit. They can hit their nuclear weapons facilities. They can hit Iran itself. But a target that's going to be ripe for them to hit are Iranian tankers, particularly Iranian tankers coming out of the Suez Canal, heading up to Syria to provide refined fuel to Syria. Remember, Iranian tankers right now are providing a key linchpin with current oil reductions in production by OPEC Plus, by Russia. Russia isn't just reducing oil production, but they're under the price cap and oil sanctions by the G7 and the EU. Iranian oil is flooding out into the marketplace, and Iranian tankers, Iranian national tankers of NTIC, that's their national shipping line, would be susceptible tankers. And for the past 5 years, we've seen Iran hitting Israeli-owned ships on a fairly consistent basis coming out of the Persian Gulf. So if Israel decides to hit Iranian tankers, Iran could retaliate in the Persian Gulf. This is oil that's heading out to supply Europe and China and the rest of Asia. This could conceivably cause fuel prices to spike exponentially if all of a sudden we see a reduction in available oil prices, oil stocks.
So, looking at Israel one more time, you've got a chance, you've got an opportunity. Obviously, there you have connections to the Mediterranean, obviously with the coast there as well. But you also have the connection down to the Red Sea at the southern tip of Israel there as well. Is Israel running the risk here of really? I know they're trying to isolate the Gaza Strip as much as humanly possible, but are they themselves isolating themselves from any basically trade coming into those areas because it's such a hot spot and there's only really 2 points of access?
Well, I think one of the reasons you're seeing the Sixth Fleet, is particularly the Ford carrier battle group, being moved into the Eastern Mediterranean right now. Along with the carrier, you have additional surface vessels coming in. You have air elements coming into the U.S. Air Force. They'll probably be based in maybe in Crete or in insular Turkey. They're going to try to provide protection to ensure that there is no disruptions of global trade. You have another issue here with if Israel goes into Gaza, which is what they seem to be wanting to do next. What happens when you have a refugee crisis, people streaming out of Gaza into Egypt, for example? Egypt does not want to take Palestinian refugees. They've made that perfectly clear. And if Egypt has to deal with a Palestinian refugee crisis, they have the leverage of the Suez Canal to try to get support and aid for this. And so the potential of this conflict staying within the boundaries of Israel and Gaza it seems to me to be very narrow. And this could have the impact that we've seen before in global supply chain crises. When this happens, remember the last time the Suez Canal was closed before ever given was the 1967 war between Israel and Egypt, where the Suez was closed for 8 years. It wasn't until after the Yom Kippur War of 1973 that the canal was opened back up. And then it took an extensive amount of salvage to remove ships that had been sunk in the canal and to remove mines. And so the potential here for disruptions in global shipping in a Mideast crisis is always there.
So, as you look at this situation, in terms, obviously, the humanitarian part of this is going to be the biggest concern, I think, for everybody involved. But past that, in terms of shipping, how much do you take your temperature in terms of how, if you think you should go to Israel, or if you should try to get a load, come back out of Israel? How is shipping going to be affected by this conflict as the temperature rises and falls and hopefully doesn't escalate too much?
Well, as of right now, we haven't seen anything directly on shipping. So I think what we're seeing is normal ships, normal freight is going in and out of Israel. A lot of traffic is moving in. However, one of the things that we could potentially see is if this does expand, that you may start seeing those disruptions. We're getting some disruptions in the southern port because of security issues. They want to make sure what's coming in is not a potential terrorist use material. So they're doing additional screenings coming in. But the main port of Haifa is in full operations. Schedules are there. But again, shipping lines are going to be adverse if all of a sudden insurance rates start going up. And if you start seeing attacks on shipping or attempted attacks on shipping, that could mark a beginning of an escalation of insurance rates. And when you start getting those insurance rates, that's when shipping firms decide whether or not it's worth their money to go ahead and do this. Very small ships go in and out of Haifa and Ashdod. Plus, Israel has its own domestic shipping line, Zim, where it can basically haul a lot of the cargo for themselves should they need to divert ships into that area.
Real quick, just as we come to the end of this, Sal, is Israel basically the only country, the only player in this that controls whether or not this escalates, or are others involved as well that could possibly play a hand here?
No, I think the one who's really going to be in charge of that is going to be Hamas. Is what happened, how the Israeli reaction to Hamas and what Hamas does, and then what does Iran do? How does Iran handle that situation? Iran has announced that they are supporting it. Remember, this is part of a larger Cold War that's going on in the Mideast. The reason Hamas is making this strike now is because Israel is in negotiations with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Iran are two different sides of Islam. They have been in a Cold War for a long time now. They've been fighting out in the southern end of the Red Sea, down at Yemen, where we've seen ship strikes on that end. The potential here is that this turns into a larger conflict. This is always the big fear, is that a spark in the Middle East will trigger a larger Middle East conflict. And then we're talking about export of oil out of the Persian Gulf, closing of not just the Suez Canal, but the Red Sea. That this has global implications. One of the reasons why we should be watching it. The good thing is that shipping will always find a route. If they have to, they will once again go around Africa, but that was an expensive proposition when it was done in the 60s and 70s.
Hopefully it's not a tinderbox situation, but obviously it is headline number one across the world. Sal, thanks so much for joining us. I know you got to get to class, so we'll let you go, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
All right, we'll take a short break and come back and wrap up this edition of FreightWaves Now after this.